Hello there and welcome. So now that we are done with creating our bear, we can basically create any other variation of animals or enemies or monsters. You can be creative and create anything that you need for your own game and simply duplicate this entire process. In this episode, we want to start working on another thing, something that was requested not once, and I'm talking about creating a ranged weapon. So we're going to create a bow and arrows. It will take a couple of episodes because it will require us to do several steps. But eventually you'll be able to create your own ranged weapon. You will be able to replace the bow and arrow with something else if it fits your game. Just something that I want to mention, we're not going to create modern weapons like guns. If you want this for your game, for your survival game, and it somehow fits into the game, you can go to my FPS tutorial series where we create a nice system. We create a weapon script that allows you to create various weapons, automatic weapons, single shots, even burst and things like that. And all you need to do is basically replace the model of the weapon and change the settings a bit and you will have different weapons. So if you need something like that, you can go there. We are just going to create this ranged weapon, this arrow and bow. But again, it depends really on the style of your game. Obviously, in our kind of survival game, it doesn't make sense to have guns. So first of all, we're going to create the bow model, and it's basically the same thing we always do, right? We need to create some kind of prefab for the actual model. We can go to our resources folder, and we have the different models. And then we also need to create the inventory item. So for example, we have the axe model and we have the axe inventory item. We have the fishing rod model and then we have the fishing rod inventory item. So it's basically the same thing. We have one thing that will actually appear inside the inventory and inside the quick slots, and one model that will actually be instantiated when we want to use it. So before we start with the actual model, let's just not forget it. Let's go to our equip system. And inside the equip system, we can scroll down. And if we get to this part over here, calculate item model, we're basically checking which kind of inventory item we clicked on. And if this item is usable or equipable, then we basically get the model for this inventory item. Obviously, this entire system can be improved a bit more, be a bit more efficient, but we're just going to stick with it. So we're going to add another case, and this time it's going to be bow, and we're going to instantiate the bow model. So this is the convention. We have the name of the inventory item, and then we have bow underscore model. And we can see that it's the same with all the other models. So we're going to make sure this is here. And this is basically the only thing we need to do inside the equip system. Just add this calculation. Now, you probably know that on our axe, for example, we have this equipable item. But we created this equipable item rather early in the series, and it's not as generic as I would like it to be, so we cannot just add this script on other objects because we have the swing and things like that are very specific to our axe. So this will only work for the axe. We can even rename this to be axe, and it will only be used for our axe. Maybe it will also be used for a sword, but this will not be relevant for something like a bow. For example, for our fishing rod, although it's an equipable item, we never used this equipable item script. We created our own fishing rod script, and this allows us to use this model in a separate game, and we don't have to rely on our actual system and all the other systems that we created here. We can just use this fishing rod model in separate games because it has its own script. So the same way, we want to create our own bow script or BowController script that will sit on the model, and it will be activated as soon as the model is instantiated. So it will not rely on other systems. It will not rely on the equip system. The equip system simply checks which item we click on inside the inventory. It checks if it's an equipable item, and if it is, then it simply goes over here, and then we can click on it, and it will instantiate the model. So that's the only thing that the equip system does. The bow itself will be independent, and it will work independently. So we need to decide which kind of bow we want to create. You can use any model that you like. Of course, you need to make it suitable for your game. I'm going to provide you a link for this pack over here. It's a free pack. Again, you can use paid ones, but you get a bunch of models. And the nice thing about this pack is that the bow is already animated. So some of you will struggle to animate other bows because of the string, but this asset pack has a model that actually comes with an animator, and you have this simple animation of stretching the bow, and this will save you a lot of headache. So we're going to use this, but of course you can use your own models. So after you import it into the game, we're going to find it over here. Let's see, I think I deleted it, so let's import it back again. We can go to Package Manager. Let's search for it, free. Medieval weapons, and we're going to import it. And now we can see it over here. So we go into our prefabs and we can find a wooden bow. Now, obviously, this is still not compatible with URP. So let's go to our materials. Let's select all of them. So I press Shift and select everything. Then go to Edit, Render Pipeline, Universal, Upgrade Selected Materials, and Proceed. And now they're going to stop being pink, and we can go to our prefabs and we can drag our wooden bow into the scene. So let's just go to our scene view. And as you can see, it's very small compared to our character and the proportion is not good. So first of all, let's unpack this from being a prefab. And let's change the scale to be a bit bigger. We're going to rename this to bow model, the same way all of our models are named. So bow_model. And this is important because the code is going to search for this model. Now, if we expand the bow, we can see that it has a lot of components and it actually has different points on the string, and this is used for the animation. And if we click on our bow, we can see that it has an animator, although it doesn't have any kind of controller. So we need to create this controller so we can use the animation. Also, if we click back and we go to our actual model and we click on the wooden arrow, wooden bow, we can see that it has an animation inside and we can play it over here. So we have this animation and this is very useful. We don't need to create it by ourselves. So let's just create the controller over here, or maybe inside our animation folder. Let's create an animator controller and name it bow animator. And we're going to drag it on the bow model over here. Now we also want to use the actual animation. So let's go into our asset, model, wooden bow, and over here, we're going to expand this and we can find this animation. So we're going to duplicate this. So Control D, and it's going to go over here and we can rename it to draw bow. But we need to change it a bit because the way it works right now, the bow is being drawn, but then it goes back. And this is the entire animation. We want to separate this into two parts. First of all, we're going to have the draw, and we can keep it this way until we shoot. And when we shoot, we want to be undrawn back over here. So we're going to select this animation, go to the animation tab. And if we play this, we actually need to select the bow. Oh, it's not going to play because we still don't have this. So let's just create a new node over here. Let's create a draw state or just a draw node. And we also want to create another one that will be onDraw. We are going to create a bool named isDrawing. And we're going to create these transitions. Of course, we also need an empty state, so this will be the default one. So we set this as the default one. We have a transition to the draw. So this will happen when we start the game or when we instantiate the bow. And then it will be triggered if this boolean is triggered. So it will get drawn, and then it's going to go over here if this is false, and it will go over here if this is true, right? So if we draw, it will draw. If not, it will undraw. Also, we want to set isDrawing over here because we want this to happen the first time we actually draw. Okay, so the animation will look nice. So isDrawing, so the first time we are drawing and we are going to trigger this, it's going to go from this empty state or initial state. It's going to draw the bow, and then it's going to automatically go back over here. And then when we start drawing, it's just going to use this loop over here. Okay. And also we want to remove the exit time. So we remove the exit time over here and maybe over here. I'm not sure, but let's just do it as well. And we're going to drag this into the slot. And then we also want to drag it into the onDraw slot. Now you may be confused, why are we using the same animation, but I'm going to show you what we're going to do. First, we need to actually change this animation. As I told you, we don't want the full animation. So if we click on our bow, it's not going to work, right? Or yes? Yes. Okay, so the full animation right now goes like that. We draw the bow, but then it goes back to the start. And we don't want this. We want the animation to only be drawn up until here. And that's it. And only when we undraw, it will go back to the original position. So all of this is not relevant. So what we're going to do is up until second 13, we're going to select everything. All of these, okay, and it's going to automatically select all of them, all these frames, and we're going to delete them. Now, this will not be possible if you did not duplicate the actual animation. So you have to duplicate it in order to modify it and delete it. But basically, delete all these frames up until this frame over here. We can also go to frames, and it's basically frame 13. So now it will be like this, and it will stay. And now for the undrawn, we're going to reverse it, so it will basically go back to the original state. And the way we can reverse it, instead of changing these frames and setting these frames here and spending time on this, we can do a very simple trick. We can go to the animator, and on the onDraw node, we simply set the speed to be -1. And because it's -1, it will basically reverse the animation. And we're going to see it in a second. So basically you want to have this draw bow animation, the one that you duplicated, and you want to modify it. But for the draw node, it's going to be speed 1, and for the undraw, it's going to be speed -1. Okay? And it's basically going to reverse the animation back to the undrawn position. Now we also want to add some kind of spawn transform inside the bow model, so we can actually spawn the arrow inside of this bow model. So we're going to right click, create empty, and we're going to name it arrow spawn. Now before we touch the position of the arrow spawn, let's just change the position of the bow, because at this point it's not rotated as we want, and when we instantiate it, we want it to be in our exact position. Now, what I did was basically drag the bow into the player tool holder, and then it would appear over here, and I would just position it and rotate it, but I already found the exact positions. So the positions, if I drag it into the tool holder and I change the position, it's basically, we can take this over here. The position should be 0.5, 1, 0.5, minus 100, 0, 0, and 1, 1, 1. Okay, so now it's going to be in this position when we instantiate it inside the tool holder, and we're basically going to make it into a prefab. So we are going to drag this into our resources folder, and we're going to delete it. Now, if we go over here, I think I already have this old one from the testing. I'm just going to delete it. But this is the one that we created, so let's just rename it to be bow model and not bow model 1. And now if we double click on it, we can see that it still kept the positions, so that's good. But we also want to change the positions of the arrow spawn. So we're going to position it somewhere in front of the bow. And I already have the positions because I played around with this. So it's going to be something like 1, 0.5, 100, minus 5. Now this may be different for you. Maybe we can play around with this a bit, move it around. It doesn't really matter. Again, I'm just showing you what you need to do and not the exact values, right? Because you will have different models. So you place it in front of the bow and the arrow will be instantiated here. The reason we rotated this on the y-axis is because it's important that the blue arrow will point forward because this is the forward position. And we're going to instantiate the arrow and shoot it to the forward position. So make sure the blue arrow is forward. If we change the y, you can see that it's not going to be forward. So just set it to be 100 or just make sure that it faces this direction. Of course, we can play around with this later. So now that we have our bow, we can continue and create a script named BowController. Now I'm going to provide you a link for this script because it's rather long. Simply create this script, BowController. You're going to find the link over here to this gist. We're simply going to copy everything. And don't forget all of these braces. I think there is a simpler way to just copy all the content. I'm not sure. But anyway, just copy everything and don't forget any braces and then paste them into this script. So double click on the BowController, delete everything and just paste it. Okay, so you should not have any kind of error over here. Everything should look fine. Now you're going to save this and we're going to go over the script so you can actually understand. So if you want to do some changes in the future, but before I explain about this script, we're going to go back to Unity and we're going to add a few references. So on our bow, let's just drag our bow back into the scene. Well, you actually don't need to drag it into the scene, just double click on the prefab. And we are going to add this script over here. So BowController. And now we need a reference to the spawn position. So we're going to drag the arrow spawn over here. We're going to keep all these values like this. This is just the name of the prefab for the arrow that we're going to look for. So when we create the arrows, again, I forgot to delete this. You can see the arrow over here. Let's just delete this because we're going to do this together. This is from my testing. But you can see that we're basically going to have a prefab and we're going to look for it inside the resources. So we need a name for it. We also need a reference to the inventory system to check if we have enough arrows and if we want to delete arrows. But because our inventory system is a singleton, we don't really need a reference to it. This is just if your game is not using a singleton for the inventory system. Maybe you want to use this BowController in a different game. So maybe you're going to have a reference to the inventory system like this. Eventually we're going to change this. We're going to use the actual singleton, but this is just an option so you can have a reference to the inventory system over here. Now let's go over the script a bit so you understand. We have a reference to the animator because we want to be able to basically trigger this bool is drawing and then we can know if it's drawing or not. We have this reference, although we're not going to even use it. We have the name for the arrow prefab. We have this bool over here. We also have the path inside the resource folder, although we can basically delete one of them and use the other because it's the same string. We also have a reference to the arrow prefab, and we also have the spawn position, and we have the shooting force. So you can play around with the shooting force. This is a nice value, but you can play around with this. So we get a reference to the animator. We load the prefab because we want it to be loaded before we actually use it. And then inside the update method, we're going to check over here if we have enough arrows. At this point, we're not using this. We're going to implement this a bit later, but this is why we're using true, because we basically always want to shoot the arrow. Later, we're going to add some kind of if inventory system, we have item count, let's say arrows is bigger than 0. So if we have at least one arrow, then you will be able to handle the bow. Otherwise, you're going to cancel. But for now, we're not going to do this. We're just going to say true, so it will always allow us to shoot the bow. So as long as this is true, we are going to be able to click on the right mouse button. It's going to draw the bow. If we draw it and we also click on the left mouse button, on the right mouse button, it's going to cancel it, right? And if we're going to draw it and left click, then it's going to release the bow or basically shoot it. So we have all of these options, and I'm going to show you how it actually looks like. Then inside the start draw, we are going to set this bool and we're going to trigger this animation. Let's just make sure that it actually is drawing. Oh yes, so we should get an error because I'm using a lowercase is, but over here we're using this capital letter. So just make sure it's the same. Change this to be is with a capital I. It should be the same as here. And for the cancel, we're doing the opposite. And for the release arrow, we're basically shooting the arrow, okay? Now at this point, we're also going to remove the arrow from the inventory, but as I told you, we still don't want to do this. Now for the shooting of the arrow, we basically calculate the direction, we instantiate the arrow prefab, and we shoot it to this direction, and we shoot it by simply adding a force to the rigid body, and we multiply it by the shooting force, and that's it. For the calculate direction, we basically send a ray to the middle of the screen, and then we check for the exact direction, and we take the spawn position, and we basically create a direction from the spawn of the arrow to the middle of the screen, right? So it will shoot to this reticle that we have in the middle of the screen. And again, you're going to see how it works when we add an arrow. So now that we have all of this, let's just make sure that our bow is actually instantiated, but we also need to create the bow inventory item. Again, I forgot to delete this from my testing. So we're going to delete this and do this together. Although you should already know how to do this by now if you've been following all these 60 episodes. You simply want to create an inventory item. So our bow is exactly like our axe. Simply select your axe inventory item, duplicate it, Ctrl D, rename it to bow, change all the different things over here, for example, the name, and also the description, functionality. We're not going to touch this right now. It's going to be an equipable, so keep it at equipable. You can also maybe make it a trashable. We don't want this to be consumable. We don't want this to be usable, right? Usable are usually potions and food and things like that. So it should be pretty much like the axe. And we also have this weapon damage script. For now, you can leave it, but later we're going to change this and we're going to use it. Although you can also add this functionality to the actual arrow and not to the bow. Let's just leave it over here. But all you need to do is duplicate one of your inventory items, change the settings over here, and that's it. Obviously, we also want to change the sprite, so it will be a bow sprite. I don't think I have a bow sprite, so maybe later I'm going to look for some kind of bow sprite. We have some swords and things like that. We don't have a bow, so later I'm going to fight some kind of bow. Let's just set something that looks like a bow. I don't know. We even have this kind of arrow, but we don't have a bow. Well, it doesn't matter. Later I'm going to find something. Let's just set this thing over here, this weird thing. And this will be a different sprite. So make sure you have a bow sprite over here as well. And now we can basically add this into our crafting system, right? We can say that you need some logs, some sticks to craft a bow, and then you can simply add it into your crafting system. Again, you should already know how to do this because we did this a lot of times, and you can simply go to the episode when we created the crafting system and see how we created the different blueprints. Let's just maximize this. So if you open the crafting system, you can basically add it over here to tools or maybe weapons, maybe have a different category for weapons and add it over here, and then it's going to instantiate the bow into your inventory. Now, we want to test this, so we're simply going to expand our player, our canvas, our inventory screen, and inside a slot, we're going to add this bow. So again, this is from my previous testing. I'm just going to delete it and I'm going to add the bow inventory item into the slot. So we don't need to craft it. We can actually test it when we just start the game. So now that we have this, let's just make sure we did not forget anything. Well, if we do, we're just going to fix it. So now we're going to start the game. And if I right click on this, it's going to equip it into the quick slot. And then if I press 1, it's going to instantiate the bow. Now at this point, we don't have any arrows, so it's not going to shoot. But if I right click on the mouse button, it's going to draw the animation. And if I release it, it's going to undraw it. If I click on it and then I press on the left mouse button, it's going to shoot. But obviously at this point, we don't have any arrows. And again, it says null because it doesn't find the arrows. So this is okay. Now we can see that everything is working. And if the bow looks a bit weird, you can simply change the scale of it and make it look the way you want it to. But we can see that the animator is triggered and everything is working. Let's just where's the bow? You can see draw, undraw, draw, undraw. Now we get this error, and this is again one of these errors that we talked about in the previous episode. Things that happen because of our Unity inspector, the fact that we're stopping the game from Unity, and if we go and double click on it, it will bring us to the enemy spawner. So we handled this in the previous episode. I don't know why it still gives us a problem. I mean, what is happening? We stop the game. When we stop the game, all of these objects are being destroyed, right? Because that's what happens when we stop the game. All of these objects are being destroyed. Now we have this bear spawner inside, and inside the bear spawner, we have this undestroyed. So this undestroyed is basically triggered, and then we lose reference to something over here. I assume that we're losing a reference to the current enemy. Although we should not lose a reference because we should have a current enemy. But what happens is maybe that the current enemy is being destroyed, and then we also lose this reference. So a very simple fix will be to do a null check if the current enemy is not null. And that's it. Again, these are just errors that we get because of the Unity editor. Let's also save the bow. But with this check, it's not going to trigger this problem. Let's just make sure that I'm right. We start the game. Stop the game. And we don't have this error anymore. So now we have this bow, but obviously we don't have any arrows, and we're going to continue in the next episode, and we're going to create these arrows. So by the end of the next episode, we are going to have a functional arrow, and we're going to be able to even damage the bear. Now I know that it can be frustrating that if you are following these episodes in real time, you need to wait a lot of time for the next episode. But there's nothing I can really do at this point. I don't have an option to create more frequent episodes because I have my own life, I have my family, I have my full-time job that has nothing to do with Unity. And at this point, this Unity channel cannot be my full-time job. I wish that it was my full-time job and it would actually pay my bills. And I could do this all day long and create many tutorials and many episodes because I have a lot of ideas for tutorials and different tutorial series and different guides and things like that. But I really cannot do this as much as I want because I don't have time for this. So if you're just watching these episodes when they're already completed, then good for you. You don't have to wait. But if you're actually following this as they go out, it can be frustrating, and I'm sorry. I hope that in the future it will be more frequent, and then it's going to be much easier to follow these tutorials and not wait that long. So in the next episode, we're going to continue with the system. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you're still not a subscriber and just follow this tutorial. It will be very helpful. And you can also leave a like, you can share, you can become a member of the channel. And I'll see you next time.